Hey guys, it's Kat, and today we are going to do yet another reaction video. This is going to be yet another live stream that I have recorded and edited. By the time you guys see this video, you should be able to join my Spark membership, which allows you to see live streams on my YouTube channel. If you're interested in joining, go to my YouTube channel, click on memberships, and join the new Spark tier. This is going to be a doozy of a video. So we're going to be watching an episode of the Diary of a CEO podcast. And it's one that right now is kind of going viral, even though it seems to be a couple of months old. It is an interview about the birth rate. You know, one of those fun, light conversations. I thought I would watch this because I kept getting clips of this in my feed, and I figured I would come and just share my thoughts over here. So I've never seen an episode of this podcast at all. The description of this video, it says, millions of men are quietly giving up. Dr. K explains why. Harvard-trained psychiatrist and addiction expert Dr. Alec Konija breaks down the invisible crisis facing young men today, from rising porn addiction and emotional numbness to the collapse of dating and identity confusion. Dr. K explains how a generation of men is struggling to find purpose, connection, and hope. This is the conversation no one wants to have, but everyone needs to hear. So this is a clip from the full episode that is apparently also available on his YouTube channel, and it was uploaded in July of 2025. So it's very interesting that it's going trending again now. Now, of course, we have to talk about the birth rate because we are in a time when that is a point of political conversation. Many are saying that because the birth rate is declining, there are some things that need to happen. And I'm very curious to hear what solutions Dr. K has to propose, though unfortunately, the little bit that I have heard so far does give me the impression that I'm not going to agree terribly too much with his solutions.
What have you seen happening between men and women right now?
Women, I think, don't need men as much as they used to. And I think this is in part because of this whole sexual revolution and the pill and feminism and all these things. We're getting married less. Men's attitude towards women has become a little bit more resentful in certain pockets of the internet. They perceive relationships with the other sex to be disposable more than ever before.
Men view women?
I would say both. And I think in part that's because of dating apps, just the perception of choice. The feeling that if you don't work out, there's another 1,000 people on my phone that I could give it a shot to.
Side note, I got a notification today from OkCupid because I still have an OkCupid page. And it literally said, "You've got choices." And it was the weirdest thing to me because that is definitely the language that sort of engenders this sort of idea, right? And as you guys know, I'm a polyamorous person. I am literally the nightmare of probably your average man in America who believes in some of this like red pill bullshit. As a polyamorous person who is in several relationships, I met most of them not on online dating. And if I were to go back and subtract all of the men that I've ever met on online dating from my life, I would probably be significantly less traumatized. I mean, I do think that online dating is a situation where you're sort of set up for failure. Is it possible for you to meet someone? Sure. I personally have always had a much easier time meeting people in person, and I am a transgender woman, right? So there's a lot of reasons why internet dating would probably work a lot better for me. But my experience has been that a lot of times the point of online dating is that they put people in front of you who you're not interested in so you can stay there longer to find the one or two people that you maybe could possibly date. And as a person who has dating apps and is also very social, I really do think that if you make a commitment to spending time outside of your home in the spaces where the things you enjoy are commonly practiced, you will probably end up running into someone who thinks you're kind of cute.
So if I was an 18-year-old and I came to you, and let's say I'm your nephew or something like that, and I'm like, Stephen, fully formed adult, handsome man in relationship, I'm struggling to date. What should I do?
You want me to give you advice? Yeah. I think you should work on yourself, especially as an 18-year-old man, because I think you need to, especially at that age, create some advantages. And so working on yourself could be learning, reading, going to the gym, building up the ability to provide for someone else and to protect somebody else. That's kind of really where I'd start. And again, that's biased because that's what I did at 18 years old.
Great. So let's say I do that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm like, hey, I'm on this growth journey. And I'm sure you've encountered this, and there are going to be people in the audience who are like, the reason they're watching this podcast is because they're trying to do that. They're still not getting dates, right? Yeah. It's still hard to find a girlfriend. Then what do you have to say to them?
I would assume that the reason it's not working is because they're not in this frame of mind to find love.
And when someone says, when a dude says, I'm trying to do everything right, what is the most common response that they get, right? So like,
try harder or like...
Yeah, right? If you look at Twitter, what you'll find is people will be like, it's impossible to find a good woman. And let's say a dude says that. It's impossible to find a good man. So maybe some people will be supportive. So you'll have a woman who says it's impossible to find a good man. You know, there are a lot of people who are like, yeah, like men are trash. Fine. And then a lot of people will be like, you're not trying hard enough. You're not going to the right places. That gets, we as men get that a lot more because there's a societal bias that men don't need help, right? So if you look at like the comparison of scholarships, male-only scholarships versus female-only scholarships, there's about $4.9 billion worth of scholarships given out in the United States from private sources. Female scholarships outside of athletics are way higher than male scholarships. So if you look at athletics.
Yeah, and do you know why that is? Because women have had to fight for the right to gain and access to their education. And they face systemic barriers to that because of sexism, because of misogyny. And that's not me just being like, oh my God, it's literally because women face bias. Oh my God, there's more scholarships for women.
The number is way higher for men. But the really weird thing is that like 60% of people who graduate from college are women.
Yeah.
So the people who need more gender-based support are men, but we don't really do that.
Men don't need more gender-based support because less men graduate college. Right now, there's a lot of men who view college and participation in academics as an inherently feminine thing. So there are men who, because of their relationship with gender, view getting an education and being successful at getting that education as something that essentially makes them a woman. And so what are we really talking about here? What are we really talking about here? Scholarships definitely help you complete college, but they're not going to do the work for you. And a lot of men don't want to do the work. And a lot of the women who take seriously the opportunity for them to get an education apply themselves and have been successful. And what we're seeing is that because women have been given the opportunity, have taken it and ran with it, there are a lot of men who no longer feel like they have a place in this society, who say that, what do I have to offer to a woman if it's not the role of a provider because she can make so much more money than me? And what's bizarre to me about this is that instead of actually trying to work harder to make more money than her, a lot of these guys just throw their hands up and say, well, why isn't this woman willing to lower herself for me? And why is this woman so interested in having her own things and being independent when she can just have my children? You know? And I don't think a lot of men have fully unpacked that just because you've worked on yourself doesn't mean you deserve a woman. It really doesn't. The problem I think most men have is this idea that they believe that because they are a man, they deserve to be in a relationship with a woman. And that's just not how this works. People get into relationships because it works for them. People get into relationships because they are generally mutually beneficial and enjoyable, not because there's some. And if you're not interested in making the relationship enjoyable, she's probably not going to stick around. And I think that a lot of men, they work out, they go to the gym and they get buff and they take testosterone and they think that's like working on themselves, when a lot of times the work that you need to do in order to get a woman is emotional work. It's unpacking the patriarchy that you've been raised with and recognizing that this woman who exists underneath this patriarchy, who is harmed by it, who struggles beneath it, probably wants to be with a man who isn't going to remind her of that. I know that it seems complicated to men because for many of these men, patriarchy really is their lifeblood. It truly is. They live and breathe it because it is the thing that gives them power, right? But you have to recognize at the core of it, women want to be in relationships where they feel seen and respected. And for a lot of women, they may not feel like that's a thing that they want to do with a man. And that's not a slight towards anyone. It's them just wanting to do what they want with their body. And I think that a lot of men think that because they want children, women should just be willing to do it. And I think a lot of men don't understand like the weight of pregnancy and how much it puts a woman's body at risk, and the fact that if you are demonstrating that you barely care for the mother, you're certainly not going to care for the child. And what we see time and time again is that these men don't really care for the child once the child is here. We still got much, much more time to go.
Usually, like if a man has a problem, this is a man's problem to solve. And when a man goes out and says, I'm having trouble dating, but what people will say is men will say, work harder, try harder. You know, people will and people will really be nasty about it. They're like, do you not know how to talk to women? Stop being a creep. And then the other thing that we're really seeing is that there is like this very like deep anger, entitlement. There's like this incel movement. You know, there's this like alpha male, beta male kind of thing. And I don't know if you kind of get this, but there's like a deep sense of like anger, right? There's like in men, and I think women feel it too. This is why women are so terrified. This whole thing about, would you rather be in a forest with a bear or a man? Did you hear about this? No. So like people would ask this question on Twitter to women. It's like, would you rather be in a forest with like a bear or a man? And like women feel safer with a wild bear than they do with a man. So I think people are picking up on this like existential, and I don't know if that makes sense to you, but there's like an existential like cry coming from men, which can manifest as anger. I think we're also seeing reflections of this like in South Korea with like dropping birth rates, right? Where like men are getting really angry, they feel really entitled. And I think this is where it's important to understand a biological difference, and we'll get to what I think is going on. So a woman does not need a man in order to pass her genes along. Right. So, I mean, like literally, I know it sounds weird, but like if you're a woman, you can just go to a sperm bank and you can get pregnant. You can just have a child without, you can also argue that it's easier for women to find a man who is willing to impregnate them than it is for a man to find a woman willing to carry their child. But I mean, literally, we live in a society where women can just procreate if they feel like it and men cannot. So there's a fundamental power balance there. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it is what it is.
Where are they getting the sperm, though? Like, okay, if a woman can go to a sperm bank and have a baby because that's the only way that she can procreate, I guess, how is a man who jerked off into a jar not also procreating? Is it because he doesn't have ownership over that child? Is that what the point, is that kind of the point that's being made? That the tangible difference is that once the child is here, the mother owns the child, but the father doesn't. I'm actually very curious about this because this is just something that stood out to me as I was listening to this. Like, if what a man really wants to do is have a child, just have a child, right? How is he not procreating by coming into a jar? He's procreating. It's just not seen as his child, right? I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting way of saying that, I guess.
So I think what we're starting to see is actually like a mass extinction event. Many years ago, I was a loser, and the world that we lived in necessitated my entry into third spaces. I had trouble talking to girls, but I was forced into
tell.
college.
Yeah, we can tell.
When I got my first job, it was serving ice cream. I was forced to interact with girls. I was active in a summer camp where I met girls, was forced to talk to girls. So I sucked at talking to girls, but the world that I lived in was structured so that
forced to talk to girls. Okay, I'm gonna let him finish his thought, but like, why do you feel forced to talk to girls? Because you were in a scenario where you had to have a conversation with a girl? So does that mean that before that point, you made a intentional decision to predominantly converse with other men? Now, I'm assuming that you probably have a mom, maybe, I don't know your situation. Like, do you just not talk to women? And why is that? Is that because of a way you feel about women? Like, what's that about? I don't really get the term forced. Like, anyway, I'll let him finish his thought.
I still had to talk to girls. I had no option to retreat from interaction and painful interaction with the opposite sex. I think literally what we're seeing, because all this stuff started to get really bad during COVID. So what happened in COVID was actually like a natural selection event, but it wasn't a natural selection event about life and death. That's what people think natural selection is. What happened during COVID, sure, a lot of people died and that's bad. But the post-COVID world, some people were able to adapt to it and some people are not. We're seeing a spike in social anxiety. Now I can work from home. Now I have pornography. Now I have all this stuff going on to where I'm not forced to learn how to interact with women. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
So now you can live your whole life at home. And I think what's starting to happen is literally natural selection. And the way that natural selection works is people think it's like, oh, if natural selection means I'm weak and someone is strong. That's not technically correct. Natural selection is you were made a certain way, someone else is made a different way, and then the environment changes. Which one of these two is suited to, it's not even adaptation because all the adaptations have been made. And I think the best example of this is like literally Darwin's finches. So you've got one finch that has a hard beak that can crack a nut. You've got another finch that has a very sharp beak that can get a bug out of a cactus that has these very tight flowers. And so if something happens and all the cacti die out, the birds that rely on the cacti bugs will start to die out too. They don't know how to procreate in this world anymore. And I think what we're seeing with like all these alphas, betas, incels, what we're seeing in South Korea is there is a whole generation of men that is like, we are literally watching them die out in real time because we've got 32-year-olds, 35-year-olds who do not have children, do not know how they're going to ever have children.
I can feel the soul of the piss-offedness developing right now. You are not owed babies. You're not owed women. You have to meet a woman who wants to have a baby in order to have a baby with a woman. And if you meet a woman and she examines the material conditions around her, you know, like in America, where now in certain states, if you get a miscarriage, it could be seen as an abortion, right? And your life, your body could be damaged. And, you know, like the situation that we're in right now where abortion isn't legal in a lot of places and pregnancy is still kind of a life or death thing for a lot of women. Maybe they're not going to be too eager to do that. Maybe they're not going to be too eager to bring a child into a world where our president is a fucking dictator. You know, like maybe this isn't the best environment for kids. But, you know, they're not going to be the only women who feel that way, right? There's certainly women who want children. There's certainly women who are eager to procreate. And that's the thing that always stands out to me in a lot of these conversations, because I think that, you know, as a person who was raised in the evangelical church, who used to go to Christian private school, I know there are tons of women in the world who want to have children, who want to meet a good husband, right? They're just not willing to do it with someone who isn't gonna make that a comfortable experience for them. And what I think we're seeing more and more is men are really embracing a sort of arrested development, right? You look at a lot of these CEOs, and a lot of them are trying to look like younger men. A lot of them are trying to appeal to younger men. like this guy's shirt is hella tight, for example, like I'm not going to say that, people can't do what they do and be how they are. Look, I'm 35 years old, like I'm immature as fuck. But I'm trying to say that, like, I think at the core of it, when you interact with these women and they see that's who you are, the last thing that they're thinking is, oh, I want to have a baby with him. You know what I mean? That's not the first thing. That's definitely not the first thing. A lot of men, I think, have no real interest in making a woman comfortable on her terms. They say, I went to school, I went to work, I make the money, I want a child, you're a woman. And that's really as deep as it goes. There's a guy that I know, a guy that, like, we went on one half kind of sort of date, and he flirts with me a lot or whatever. He's one of these guys who I've recently kind of pieced together is a little bit of an incel, just a little bit. I mean, it's weird because he's actually, in my opinion, a pretty decent looking guy. He's a bodybuilder who I think very clearly started doing that in sort of a, I'm going to get back at those people kind of way, if that makes any sense. You can sense the immense bitterness from him. And that's, at least from my vantage point, almost like the most obvious aspect of who he is, even if he is, kind of a cute guy with muscles. And the last time I talked to him, he said that he wants to have a baby. And I was like, oh my gosh, are you even ready to have a child? Like, you don't seem like a person who could do that. And I understand the desire to want children. I understand the desire to want to have children and to continue your legacy. But whatever happened to, like, trying to make sure that you are actually the right person to be doing that? Like, if it's hard for you to get a woman who feels safe enough with you to have their child, shouldn't that be a sign that maybe you might not have the qualities that would make you a good father? Like, what I keep seeing over and over again in a lot of these topics that we go over is men will try to do everything but actually work on themselves. Even this guy, he's dismissing that, oh, it doesn't really work, right? But, like, it really does. I'm polyamorous, right? And I know that disqualifies me from this conversation for a lot of people. But what's interesting about my partners is that they've all done the work. They've all worked really hard to process themselves, process what they are doing in this world. And they've really come to recognize, like, the issues that they had, the patriarchy that they had normalized. And so the one thing that stands out about all of my partners, even though they're all very different, is that none of them want to force me into a situation I don't want to be in. None of them want for me to be uncomfortable so that they can feel like more of a man. None of them want for me to sacrifice everything just to take care of them. Will I do that on my own? Yes. But the point I'm trying to make is that they're not comfortable with it. And too many men, I think, are so comfortable watching women just sacrifice their entire lives so that they can have children. I watched this video the other day about a woman who caught her husband cheating. And when she was reading through the text messages between himself and the mistress, one of the things that he said was that he didn't want to leave the children or the family in general until the kids turned 18. The kids were 8 years old. So he was willing to take a decade of her life away from her. It's really scary out there. It really, truly is.
So that's actually happening. That's not bizarre. That's birth rate in South Korea is like 0.7. So there's a bunch of men who will never pass on their genes in the alpha male, beta male, whatever, like, in that kind of language, they talk a lot about like procreation and legacy and stuff like that. But I almost wonder, is there a mechanism in a human being that if your genes know they're dying out, what would they trigger in your mind? Right? And I think what they would trigger is exactly what we're seeing. This like existential panic, angst, even aggression, entitlement, Because if these men do not behave in this way, they're literally going to die out. So what we see in this post-COVID world is that people like maybe you or me who were like losers and didn't know how to talk to chicks in high school, we were forced into social interaction where we basically like that's where we developed in order to, so that we could talk to girls. But in this post-COVID world, all those spaces are gone. There's no forcible interaction. So then there are some people for whom it's natural to talk to girls. And that's why like we see this dichotomy where it's almost like, you know, some people like just put yourself out there, just work out, work on yourself and things will work out. And then there are a lot of other people who are like, that's not working.
I think the problem for a lot of men is that they genuinely don't like women. And I'm saying that because I've watched it. One of the weird things that sort of happened in this incel era that we're in is that I have so many conversations with men where it seems pretty normal, but then they say like one really crazy thing. It'll literally be like I'm having a relatively normal conversation with them, and then because they're horny, they'll say something really insane. And it's, you know, I for a second could have been tricked into believing that you were a relatively normal person. Now I know you're crazy. I keep coming back to this idea of like, so who are you talking to? Who are you approaching? Because I think that what's unsaid in a lot of this conversation is that when these men are complaining about women, they're really not complaining about women who would be in their vicinity. They're complaining about like a very particular type of woman not being into them. And they think that because they're men and they have that desire, that the woman should just, you know, be open to it, not recognizing that if you're chasing after a super hot babe, the likelihood of her, you know, just choosing you because you're some dude who wants it is very slim to nil to non-existent. You know, they're not just going to say, oh, okay, so you're interested. That's great. Let's do it. That wouldn't be reasonable, right? It would be reasonable for her to say, hey, I need to know a bit more about you. I need to understand who you are. And I need to make sure that you're a good person and that it's actually something that you mean and you're not just performing. And it's quite aggravating to me, mostly just because I really think that a lot of these men, if they went to the spaces that they enjoyed and they interacted with some of the women in those spaces, they would probably be fine. But instead, I think a lot of these guys, they follow these IG models and then they're shocked that these IG models don't want to be with them. Like, if you're going to punch above your weight class, you have to really work on yourself. But that's not what these men want to do. That's not what these men want to do.
200 years. You went back to the Galapagos Islands and you took Darwin's finches and you put them on Twitter, you would see that exactly what we're seeing. Some people are like, oh, like you have trouble getting bugs? Just crack a nut. Like, just get better at cracking nuts. But they have something in their makeup, something in their attachment style, something in their tendency for social anxiety, something in their neuroticism, something in their circumstances, something in their support structure that allows them to put forth effort. And then there are these other people over here who will go to therapy, who will work on themselves professionally, who will show up on dating apps. And because of the shape of their face, which cannot be fundamentally altered, or some other thing which they're not even aware of, they grew up with a certain...
This is someone complaining that certain people are willing to do the work and other people aren't, and the people who aren't willing to do the work aren't going to be able to procreate. Okay, now what? Isn't that how it's supposed to work? I'm confused.
Attachment style that they're not aware of. They grew up with on the spectrum, and their capacity to make eye contact and emotional connections is very difficult. So there's this whole crop of people who I think are trying really hard. I don't think they're losers. I don't think they're like pathetic or anything like that. I think there's something about the architecture of how these people are built so that standard advice does not apply to them. And what I feel when I sit with these people is like someone who is dying.
So I do a bit of community organizing work in the Los Angeles BDSM scene. One of the things that I dealt with pretty early on was Men who are autistic coming to my events and violating other people's consent and then saying, oh, but it's because I have XYZYX. I'm not going to say that people who are autistic don't have a very particular and unique journey towards this. But what I'm dealt with in a lot of those situations was that at the bottom of it, there was a man who is on the spectrum. Mind you, we're in a community full of women who are on the spectrum. This man violates someone else's consent, says that it's because of autism. The men are the only ones who really make excuses like this. And it's not because, oh, their autism made them violate boundaries. No, it's because they're men in a society that teaches them that women don't deserve to have them. So what ends up happening is, yeah, maybe they can't read social cues, but autism didn't make you grope that girl's breast. Autism didn't make you touch someone inappropriately. And I actually think it's incredibly ableist for people to lean into that as if it is something that makes sense, because it doesn't. Yeah, there are people who have issues being social. There are people who are going to struggle to interact with people the way that a person who isn't neurospicy would interact with other people. But I come back to my original thing of, who are we talking about and who are you pursuing? Because I know that there are plenty of autistic women who would probably love to date another autistic person who understands what they're experiencing. But it sounds like you don't want that. It sounds like you want a very particular type of person. And that's why you're having the experience that you're having. But the argument kind of being made here is that autistic men deserve to have children because they're autistic. You're not owed a baby or a wife. I don't know why this is so confusing to people.
Out. Like, that's what it feels like to sit with. This person's life, they're not living a life. They're in a slow, protracted process of dying. And when you are in a slow, protracted process of dying, pornography shows up.
Oh, okay.
And then you've got this weird thing that goes on where you get this spurt of dopamine, this existential dread of like, I am not getting to participate in life.
If I receive advice that doesn't work, I seek out more advice. If that advice doesn't work, I might seek out even more advice. But before I make the third decision to seek out advice again after the third thing didn't work out, I may stop and think, maybe I'm not actually following this advice correctly. Maybe there are some things that I would need to understand a bit better about myself. He keeps coming back to this idea that if men do the work, they should naturally end up with a baby. You can be the most well-developed, nicest, most emotionally intelligent man in the world and still be unfuckable. Not wanting to have your child and being in a relationship with you are kind of not the same thing, but they're kind of used interchangeably here. Like, you can just be in a relationship with a woman and not have children, but you want children. So you want to be with a woman who loves you enough to sacrifice her body, to sacrifice potentially her mental health. That's one hell of a commitment that a lot of men expect for women to just be willing to do. If a guy has all of these issues and a woman is perceiving those issues and they're off-putting to her, I don't think she's wrong for saying no, no matter how much it hurts someone's feelings. As a trans woman, it's almost impossible for me not to think about a lot of the discourse people have about transgender people and rejecting transgender people. And I've always sort of held, though this is kind of an unpopular opinion, that I don't think that it's necessarily always very productive to say that every single person who rejects a trans woman is like transphobic. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, right? And in a similar way, you could argue that these women who reject these men are ableist or something. But then what are we going to do with the conversation after that, right? Is the conclusion that women just have the children of men that they're not attracted to? That's what I always say in the context of the trans question too. It's like, so if this person doesn't like you because you're trans and you call them transphobic, should the conclusion be that they start to date you because they don't want to be called transphobic or seen as transphobic? Or maybe you guys are just not compatible and there are a bajillion other people in the world. I think there's like something like 348 million people in America. There's so many other people in the world. And it's quite literally so silly to act like the only option you have is to just kind of accept that it's never going to happen. When I think most of the time you guys are just not looking for the right people. You're probably approaching people who really don't want to have children with you. And that is their fucking right. I don't know why it's so complicated to these people.
It's like some people have cancer. We give them cancer treatment. They get better. But if some people have cancer and everyone's like, hey, do this chemotherapy, and it doesn't work, then how screwed are you? You're very screwed. So this is, I think, what we're seeing. This deep existential loss, this desire for connection is somehow like intersecting with pornography. Because I think pornography addiction has a spiritual component too. And if you talk to people who are addicted to pornography, they can feel it. They feel like spiritually like empty. They're like, I'm not doing anything. So one of the two variables that correlates with pornography addiction, the two strongest variables that correlate with pornography addiction, one of them is a sense of meaninglessness in life. And
so is this guy saying that because women aren't fucking men, that men are turning to porn, and that is a spiritual rupture that women need to care about? If a guy gets rejected by me and he goes home and jerks off, I have no emotions about it. None. That's him abusing himself, pun intended. What's that got to do with me? What's that got to do with women and children? And what are we talking about? Look, if the porn is so good that you don't want to have a baby anymore, it sounds like you weren't really interested in having a baby. Sounds like you wanted to fuck. Sounds like this is a conversation about you not fucking.
there's a weird spiritual angle that I talked about. But the other really simple thing is, if you want to stop watching porn, you need to have a reason to stop watching porn. And the problem with porn is that you can be kind of like living your life, and then in the in-between hours when you're like back from work and before you go on a date, or maybe you're swiping on Tinder and no one's really answering or whatever, like you just have these hours in the day where there's nothing going on. You're not living for anything. So you might as well jerk off.
I mean, there's a lot that I'm thinking about.
There's so many other things to do than jerk off, And what's really annoying to me about this? These are supposed to be smart people. This doesn't sound like a smart conversation. Married men watch porn all the fucking time. Married men who fuck their wives watch porn all the time. Men with girlfriends watch porn all the time. So is your argument that, like, if these women got with these men, they wouldn't watch porn? Because that's just on its face quite stupid. I hope this guy brings it up. We'll see.
The first is, if we go back up to your point about this being a bit of an extinction event, it poses a question about, like, what do you do about that? You said also people are trying to implement the advice, but it's not working. Now, does that mean that's a question of, like, motivation, discipline? Is it bad advice? What do we do there? And the third, I guess, question that comes to mind is, does society have a responsibility to intervene in some way to correct this?
So I think, does society have a responsibility? I don't think that is a real thing. I have never seen society take a responsibility. I don't think society can take a responsibility, right? So if like how do I get society? Like, who do I talk to?
But if you think about other people that are in marginalized groups, society intervenes to make the world,
society?
The governments, and the way that we make our laws, and the way that we give out money and grants, and the way that we shape our communities.
Yeah, so I understand the question, but I think like this, and this is just the way that I think. What is society? You say the government. And then who is the government? What is the government? It's people.
Yeah.
So I think this comes down to, forget about societal responsibility. And I think this is one of the problems, not to say that it is the problem, but this is just the way that I think. There was a case, I don't remember her name, of a woman who's being sexually assaulted in public, like on a street at nighttime. And there were a bunch of neighbors who were like aware that the sexual assault was happening, and no one called for help. And the reason no one called for help is because everyone assumed that somebody else would call for help. You know, whose problem is it? Oh, society should fix this. We stop taking individual responsibility. In the moment that we stop taking individual.
Okay, so, part of this issue, part of the problem with a lot of these conversations is that a lot of you guys don't know what you're talking about. What is society? What are we talking about with society, right? We're describing the social conditions that we live in, right? You just described a situation where someone's getting assaulted on the street and several people heard it, said nothing, did nothing. And you say, well, society should do something about it. That's a thought-terminating cliche that people say in order to, just stop taking personal responsibility. When what people are actually saying when they say that is that if we had a more community-based attitude about how we protect each other, everyone would call. Because no one would think, well, someone else is going to do it. They think someone's getting assaulted on the fucking street. And in a more real way, the reason why people probably didn't call is because they thought deep down inside that she deserved it. That she was out there on the street late at night, probably shouldn't have been doing that anyway. And if she gets, taken up in a corner somewhere, maybe she should have just gone to church or, I guess, stayed at work or something. The example you just gave was really bad. It was really bad. You're playing this game. No one's saying that everyone has the same ideas. We're saying that socially we have sort of norms that a lot of us have adjusted to. And those norms have often meant that women get assaulted and no one does anything about it. The norm, by the way, is misogyny, right? Anyway, let's keep going.
Responsibility, like unless someone shows up and runs for office and says, my goal is to do this, which by the way is happening in like South Korea. So like conservatives that are very like, there's this huge tension in South Korea right now between men and women, and this 4B movement where women are like, we're not going to have kids anymore. And then there's like this conservative kind of like pro-masculine kind of movement that is moving into government and says like, this needs to change. And we see governments responding to this mating crisis, right? So I think like China is now paying people to have children. So there's all kinds of like moves that are happening.
Korea already does that. And that's kind of the thing that I see. This is another little example of like, I thought these people were smart. Korea already does that. Korea already gives mothers financial support for having children. They're doing that to, of course, encourage the birth rate. So in so many ways, this question's already sort of been answered. I think the government supporting mothers is a very huge part of mothers deciding to have children. It's one that I think a lot of people look down at. When SNAP was taken away, there were men who went to social media to brag about how now that poor mothers are going to have less money, they're going to be more willing to welcome in a man who doesn't really have any respect for her. I wish I was exaggerating. And that guy, I'm pretty sure he was making a joke, but it was a joke based in reality. A reality where men have taken advantage of the fact that pregnancy is the top way that a woman can enter into poverty. And again, I think that this is a very big part of this whole conversation where men are really just upset that they can't quite capitalize on an impoverished woman's desperation. And that's really, really sad when you lay it out like that.
So is it society's responsibility? Like, I don't know. So I think if society doesn't do anything, what's going to happen will be really simple. And that's what I mean by we're witnessing a mass extinction event. We have a group of young men who are somewhere between 15 to 50 who will just never procreate. And then they will literally die out, right? Their genes will not be passed on. And for the people who do procreate, they will have been adapted to the post-COVID world.
Yeah.
Right? So they know how to form. They succeed on Tinder. Whereas like if you go and you look at like,
Why
if you
Tinder?
go to like some kind of senior event and you look at all the people who have grandkids, half the men there would not have succeeded on Tinder. Right. And this is something that really like shocks people when I kind of tell them this. But if you want to see like who's succeeding, it's not the dudes on Tinder who are getting laid 15 times. Like go to like a, I mean, this is sometimes a little creepy, but like if you go to a playground,
oh my God,
you're going to see like a lot of like average looking men with like average looking dad bods, which with average median incomes who are like having.
Men have this really fascinating, like really interesting way of looking at what they envision a woman to be attracted to. Like a lot of men think that women look at like jacked guys in tight t-shirts and they think, oh, I want to procreate with that, right? Nah, but not really, right? Do you know why you see all these average men? In our society, we are propagandized into seeing men in their full unflattering light and still finding it adorable just a little bit fully, right? And I think that makes women on average a little bit less shallow than men tend to be. I think it's also really funny that I know that at least a lot of the women that I know who have had children, most of their husbands are just dudes. They really are. They're just dudes. They're not like the prettiest man. They're not clavicular, you know, they're no one like that or whatever. And I think clavicular is just a dude, but that's a whole other conversation. They're pretty average men. And because they love their wives and take care of their children and don't take testosterone and spend all day in the gym, they have dad bods. Yeah, they've got dad bods. And I'll tell you this, women finding dad bods attractive is kind of a manifestation of what I'm talking about when I say that we're propagandized into seeing them in the full unflattering light and still thinking that it's cute. I like dad bods. I think dad bods are quite cute, right? But I don't think I've ever been nearly as shallow as a lot of men are. I don't know why men get the impression that women look at these jacked, like WWE wrestlers and think, yeah, I want to have hella children with them. It's interesting because I think men overcomplicate this. I don't think that they always get that they often start from a predicated idea that if they do these things, they're going to have a child with a woman. I don't think that they often register that, like, yeah, of course that's not going to work out. She has to actually like you too. And that so much of that has nothing to do with what you look like. Like this guy was talking about how, you know, these guys who do good on Tinder who, you know, they have a face that's shaped a certain way and they can't do anything about it, right? I'm going to tell you right now, I don't know very much about Dr. K. He's not a bad looking guy. His whiny attitude, though, makes him incredibly fucking unattractive. Like, this guy said the guy who's getting all the girls on Tinder isn't having kids. That's because people usually don't use Tinder for that reason. A lot of men use Tinder for free sex work. Let's just be very blunt about it, right? A lot of men go on Tinder because they're looking for easy, desperate women who have to join an app to find men. I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying that's how these men feel. They feel, why are these women who have the opportunity to leave the house and find almost any man and get laid on here? That must mean that they have low standards or that they won't require much from me. This guy has a very like internet informed conception of how relationships work. I do think that it's more simplistic than these men make it. You want women to have more children, create a scenario in our society where that is desirable. We've got war on the horizon. We've got war on the horizon. I can't imagine why a woman would not want to have children. It's crazy. Like, you go online and you listen to women, they'll speak openly about why they don't want kids. You go on here, you listen to these men talk about it, and it's as if those women didn't make it clear how they felt. It's like they don't believe that women can actually mean what they say. They need like a male interpreter for it. And a lot of the shit that this guy says about women is just not true. Or it's based in like a male fantasy of what women enjoy.
And that's what's really happening. But even those men are adapted in some way, right? Because they're not exceptionally attractive. They're not exceptionally rich, but they have something going on in their psychological makeup, which allows them to form bonds and procreate.
You just said that a huge amount of men between the age of 15 and 50 will not pass on their genes. They will effectively die out of the gene mating pool. So people will hear that and many people will go, well, that's evolution. But I want to understand if there's a counterpoint to that. Should society intervene? Why is, in the short term, we're going to have a lot of men who are disillusioned, that become incels, find themselves in pockets of the internet, are resentful, all those kinds of things. But should society intervene to course correct that? Should we put systems in place to make sure that those men meet partners?
I'm gonna answer that question with a question.
Okay.
If, let's say, a huge swath of people are dying out from cancer, should we intervene with that?
Yes.
If a huge swath of people are dying out from like a virus, should we intervene
100%.
with that?
Yes.
If a huge swath of people are dying out from genocide, should we intervene with that?
Yes.
So I think there are two important things.
One is slightly different though, isn't it? Because it's whether you.
So one is about death.
Yeah.
Right? So one is like, if a human being is dying, we should step in. But natural selection isn't necessarily about death. This is what's really tricky about it. This is why I think it gets hard. Natural selection is about passing on your genes. It's about creating viable offspring. And this is where if someone, and I think we also say yes, like if there's a couple that wants to have a child and that child has cystic fibrosis, should we help that couple? Should we help a couple procreate? We also say yes.
Yeah.
So that's why we have IVF and things like that. So I think that the tricky thing about the reason that this is different is because that's a couple. If a woman is unable to have kids, even if we say if a man is unable to have kids, should we medically intervene so that they're capable of having kids? Yes. Right? So if we're talking about a human being and there's a medical problem, or if we're talking about protecting people from death, the answer is yes. This is a new question, which is, do people have the right, and I don't know if right is, maybe that's the right word, to reproduce? And this is what's so challenging about it, is like the answer is basically no, because for men, that requires the consent of someone else. And my right to reproduce never trumps someone's right to not want to reproduce with me. Yeah. I think we sort of accept that, right? That's correct.
Clearly not.
This is where the fundamental biological difference comes in. Because a woman doesn't need a man to reproduce. I can go to a sperm bank. And once again, you can argue that you can get laid if you want to, but that hasn't been my experience. I think women struggle with loneliness and finding sexual partners and stuff quite a bit as well. There's some really bad perception on the internet. So I think this is like a new problem for society, which is why it hasn't been solved.
Or maybe it's a problem that already has been solved. You can't get laid, so you're not going to get laid. Therefore, you're not going to have kids. And then the people who get upset about that and then decide to fix that for themselves, we describe them as rapists, and then we separate them from our society. Well, no, we actually just elect them president. I don't know why I spoke of this as though we were, in an alternative reality where rapists actually go to jail. That's actually a good point for me to make at this moment as well. Men do get away with this all the fucking time. Men love to meet a woman and impregnate her and then desert her. It is something that happens all the time. And you know what's interesting to me about this? I've seen so many fucking videos about women who meet a man, fall in love with a man, and the moment she becomes pregnant, the moment she has the kid, everything changes. And at that point, you have to really think, was this all a scam? If all you wanted to do was spread your seed, why aren't you spreading it at the sperm bank? And why do you care about the fact that this woman is raising this child without you? And I really do think that it comes down to ownership. Because I think if it's not ownership, it's ego. If it's not your desire to own this child, then it's this idea that you are so pushed down in society that people don't want to have a child with you, and that bruises your ego, which of course needs to be comforted by a woman. And it's like, at no point did you ever think about all these things that you're saying and say to yourself that all of this is maladaptive and maybe this is like everything working out as it's intended to work out? Because from my vantage point, if no one wants to fuck you, if no one looked at your features and said, you're so beautiful, I would love to have your child, if no one interacted with you and said, you make me feel so safe that I think I could have your child, that is just how the cookie crumbles, you know? And this guy keeps talking around it. He says it's a problem that society hasn't really solved. It's not really a problem, though. Like, it's a problem for CEOs. Let's just be blunt about it. It's a problem for people who support capitalism. It's a problem for people who need exponential growth and therefore need exponential births, right? But it's not really a problem for those of us who understand the way that this whole thing works, right? If there's meant to be less humans, then there's meant to be less humans. It sort of is what it is at a certain point. I know that's kind of a harsh thing to say, but it's science, right? It's just how things are. And what also really annoys me is how he keeps coming back to this idea of the person with autism. And what really bothers me is how he keeps coming back to this idea of the autistic person not being able to find a partner because of their, I guess, post-COVID maladaptions. I know a lot of people who have kids and are autistic. I do. In fact, I know several. People who are autistic still have children. You know, like, I get that it could be more challenging, but it's still a thing that happens. It's still very much a thing that happens and does exist. Do you want an autistic woman? And if you don't want an autistic woman, why do you expect for a woman who isn't autistic to want an autistic man? Seriously, what's the difference? Is it that you view yourself as a man as more worthy of what you want, more deserving of what you desire? Maybe. I don't know.
That I take, I don't know what the societal answer is. I'm not a sociologist.
Thank God
so
for that.
What I have found, thankfully, we don't need to solve, or I don't think we need to solve that problem. Does it need to be solved? Sure. Should someone solve it? I think so. But what I found works really well is that usually the problem that these men are failing to adapt to can be fixed. But the problem is that the solutions that work for the people who are successful will not work for the people who are unsuccessful.
Okay.
These are apples and oranges.
This is
right?
still
So
a silly
and
argument.
this is the big mistake, is that when I say, okay, I am happily married with 2 kids, but the thing that I did won't work for these people. That's been my clinical experience. My advice does not work for them. Your advice won't work for them.
Okay.
What we need is a different system that addresses their fundamental problems. Right? Because I had what it takes internally. I was loved as a child. So
do you know what I just heard and what I'm sensing from this? Is a person who has 2 kids and a wife and still hasn't let go of it. I get that they're trying to have a larger conversation about, the epidemic of male loneliness and the birth rate and yada, yada, yada. But I really do think the answer to what he's saying is as simple as, and then you would receive different advice. Maybe advice that's a bit more informed about autism. Maybe advice that recognizes that autistic people are valid and deserve to be in relationships and can navigate relationships with each other. There are a lot of people who openly speak about autism online. It is not impossible for this person to receive good, productive advice from other people who are autistic. So knowing that, it's impossible for me to listen to what's being said in this video and not really just get the sense that this solution that he thinks should happen is more attractive than the idea that there may just be an alternative path. I really do think, again, that this is something that these men overcomplicate.
I knew how to give love and receive love. A third of the men that I meet do not know how to give love and do not know how to receive love. Has nothing to do with their Tinder profiles. That's why they're fucked. And when people can say, go to the gym, make more money, but if you do not know how to fundamentally give or receive love, then like.
Do people say that, or do men selling you courses say that? Do people say that, or do personal trainers who trade on the weekend say that? I mean, yeah, that's bad advice. That's bad advice. That is bad advice. Make more money, get in the gym. None of that tells me about your emotional intelligence. And again, if you listen to women, they are telling you what they want, but you're saying, oh, I really want that. And it's because you guys are still stuck on the girl who didn't want to fuck you in high school. That's all I keep coming back with. It's because y'all are stuck on this idea of this person who you think is really hot, so hot. And she rejected you and you haven't gotten over it. Still, maybe the hot, very socially capable woman isn't interested in the autistic dude, but maybe the hot, masking autistic woman is. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Like, it's weird to me how these men think that, like, there are no other options. But when you really, again, look at it, it's because your options are this hot IG model that you want to get the attention of, and not like the women who are probably more properly suited for you.
Like, that's a huge problem.
Is that where you start when you're trying to solve this on an individual basis?
Yeah. So, I mean, I start giving and receiving love is not where I start, because that's like so foreign to them that they don't know how to do that.
Okay.
Right. So I think there are a couple of things. The first place that I start with most men is in understanding their emotions. So we have all kinds of patterns that we engage in that are driven by different parts of us that we have no insight into. And usually this is like where the money is. So I had a great conversation yesterday with a buddy of mine. And, he gave me this fantastic example, which I've seen so many times. So, a lot of women will talk about men who are afraid of commitment.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, like, I'm dating this person, he's great, but he's afraid of commitment. Then it kind of becomes like, oh, like, the dude needs to step up and needs to be a man and needs to learn how to commit. So we put the onus on the man. You're afraid of commitment. You need to fix that. It's a really funny thing is if you look at like women that I've worked with, they sort of fall into this pattern where they date men who are afraid of commitment. And that's why they're looking for commitment, because they haven't found it yet, right? And so the really funny thing is sometimes women will select for a man who is afraid of commitment, because deep down, they're afraid of commitment.
So true.
And this is how I know this, because sometimes the dude will come into my office and he will work on his fear of commitment and he will conquer it. And the moment that he conquers his fear on commitment, the woman will retreat. They'll get terrified. They'll start to find all kinds of problems. And it's not just like men, and it's not just women are guilty of this. So there are all kinds of patterns that people will engage in that they have no insight into. First of all, understand your emotions, then you will understand your behaviors. Oh, like, why do I keep on selecting people who are afraid of commitment? Because I'm afraid of commitment. And if I can find somebody else who's afraid of commitment, I can blame them from it. And I never have to deal with my laddering up my fear of commitment.
I feel like this is the only thing he said in this video that I kind of do agree with. A lot of times people will pick people who are wrong for them because it's a pattern. It's familiar. You're used to people who don't want to commit to you. You went down this path with someone else and it feels safe and warm and productive for you, but it isn't, right? I do think that is relatively true.
So there's a lot of stuff that comes with emotion. So awareness of emotions, awareness of your patterns, the ability to regulate them. And I'd say that kind of ties it up.
So yeah, that was the video. And I'm glad I only watched this like cute little clip of it, because I don't think I could have done much more of that. I don't know too much about this podcast or what it's about, but I will link it in the description box below if you're interested in checking out this particular video. I think that the whole male loneliness conversation is a bunch of bullshit. And I really do feel that way. I think that there are a lot of men trying to sell courses. I think that there are a lot of people trying to make money off of lonely men. And I think that they're trying to capitalize on what I think are some very real grievances that men have. I think that most men are calculating that they are never going to be able to make enough money to make a family and a home. And I think that is upsetting. I think it is fundamentally upsetting. And I understand why it is, especially if that's a dream that you have. I think that those men should listen to what women are talking about, why they don't want to have children, and recognize that even if they do all of those things, that still doesn't give them an entitlement to a woman's body. And it still doesn't give them the entitlement to have their own child. You have to really work on yourself. Yeah, you do have to work on yourself before you're going to meet somebody who soon thereafter meeting you feels like you're the right person to procreate with. It's just not an easy choice, especially right now. I think if you want to have a country where women are having more children, support them in their protection of their own bodies. Support them in their own advocacy for access to birth control. Support mothers in their pursuit of having employment protections that allow for them to be able to take care of their children and also work when they need to work. Actually try to improve the material conditions of mothers in this country. Don't get on to social media and cheer about women losing SNAP benefits. Understand that pregnancy is the quickest way to poverty and recognize that most women don't want to do it by themselves. Some do, but most don't. And in order for you to be a good father, in order for you to be a productive father, it probably is going to mean that you get off your video games every once in a while. I don't try to say that to be disrespectful, but the way that some of these guys talk about this, it's like they want someone to just respect all of it, right? And the truth is, being a parent requires a lot of work, a lot of attention, and you need to be available. You need to actually be able to do more than just make the baby. You should be able to make this woman who has your child feel very good about the idea of getting pregnant and being taken care of by you, because that will be your responsibility. That is your child. So I think that this guy, he has some really funny things to say. And I've said my funny things about what he has to say. And now I want to hear what funny things you have to say about this funny little man. I don't know if he's little. I'm just making an assumption. That's probably very mean of me. I'm so sorry, Dr. K. Please forgive me. Anyway, let me know what your guys' thoughts are, especially if you're familiar with Dr. K and if you yourself are a mother. I would also really love to hear from women who are child-free, why they are child-free right now. Give some of the men who are probably going to be reading the comment section of this video something to ponder about. On that note, I'll talk to you guys next time. And as per usual, I want you to always remember and to never forget that you are beautiful and you are loved. Bye.